To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
It was just after 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere when Sacramento County Sheriff's Deputy Jeffrey Mitchell came across a white Chevy van with no plates. He called dispatch saying he was about to initiate a traffic stop and everything seemed all right. But just 7 minutes later, the dispatcher heard Mitchell's radio clicking, signaling something was really wrong. When backup officers arrived, they found Officer Mitchell lying in the ground next to his patrol car. He had been shot in the head with his own service weapon. Days later, the van was found with 2 dead bodies inside. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 243, The Murder of Deputy Jeffrey Mitchell. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell Areola. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast with a forensic science twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used, from fingerprinting to criminal profiling to DNA. Some cases have been solved with forensic science, while others have turned cold. Every story sends us a chilling reminder that not all stories have happy endings. Before we get to the episode, we've got a new Patreon supporter to thank this week, Jules C. Now, let's get to this week's episode. In 2006, 38-year-old Jeffrey Mitchell worked as a deputy for the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department in Sacramento, California, a police force that today has around 180 employees. He was born on May 28, 1968, to parents Gary and Mary in Campbell, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. As a kid, he got really into playing sports, especially baseball. He eventually became a coach for his son's baseball team and for El Dorado Hills Little League South. Deputy Mitchell played baseball for all 4 seasons at Westmount High School and earned a place on the all-league team as a senior outfielder for the championship club in 1986. He was known by his teammates as one of the hardest working players on the team, something that would stick with him throughout his entire life. He graduated from Westmont High in 1986, but instead of going away to college right away like most people probably thought he would, he surprised everyone by enlisting as an officer in the U.S. Air Force. During his service, he was sent to Kuwait to help with the Persian Gulf War. And after 5 years, he left the Air Force and returned to school, this time for college. He returned back to Northern California and enrolled at the California State University, Sacramento, where he would eventually meet the woman he was going to marry, Crystal. The two instantly connected, and not long after finishing his degree, he proposed to Crystal, and they got married in August of 1995. Deputy Mitchell spent the first few years after college graduation working as a substitute teacher, but he eventually joined the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department in 1997. His first job there was working as a physical education instructor. But by 2000, he had graduated from the academy and became a sworn deputy. Like most rookie sheriff's deputies, he worked in the jails for the first 2 years. But after putting in a ton of hard work, he was promoted to patrol in 2002. Deputy Mitchell was given the graveyard shift, which meant that he worked overnight, a shift that most people probably wouldn't voluntarily sign up for. But he was sort of the odd man out because he really didn't mind doing it. Working the graveyard meant that he could be home during the day with his wife and son, Jake. During what would be his 9-year career with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, all of Deputy Mitchell's coworkers and supervisors described him as an outstanding police officer. He was always willing to go above and beyond and took his role as a cop very seriously. One of his best traits was said to be his compassion. No matter who he met during the line of duty, he always treated people with respect and compassion, which is just one of the many reasons why what happened to him was so senseless. Let's now go to the early morning hours of Friday, October 27th, 2006. That night, Deputy Mitchell was scheduled to work his typical shift. He usually left the house around 9 or 10 p.m., worked anywhere from 10 to 12 hours, and then would return home between 7 and 9 in the morning. But that morning turned out different. He never made it home. When he started his shift on Thursday night, he had no idea what type of calls would be coming in. Sometimes he responded to calls about people selling drugs, drunk drivers, or even missing people. Other calls were just simple traffic stops, a broken taillight, or maybe speeding. As a patrol deputy, it was his job to be ready for whatever came his way. He was about halfway through his shift when he patrolled an unincorporated area of Sacramento County near Dillard Road, a location about 30 miles away from downtown Sacramento. During the daytime, this area of Highway 16 would have been a pretty drive. You've got wide open fields on both sides of the road, and most people who live out there have beautiful farms and ranches. But at nighttime, it looked completely different. There are hardly any lights out there, and you could go miles without seeing anything. Sometime between 3:20 and 3:25 a.m., Deputy Mitchell used his vehicle computer to tell the sheriff's dispatch that he was approaching a white Chevy van without license plates and planned to initiate a traffic stop. The van was near the intersection of Dillard and Mace Roads of Highway 16 and south of Jackson Highway. It was pitch dark out there with no other cars around. At first, everything about the call seemed relatively fine. It was supposed to be a completely normal traffic stop. Deputy Mitchell would ask about the missing license plates, maybe or maybe not give the driver a ticket, since in the state of California, you have to have license plates on both the front and back of your car, and that would probably be it. The driver would go in his car, and the same for Deputy Mitchell. The entire interaction would probably take less than 5 minutes. Now, the details of this next part are a little unclear, but apparently, Deputy Mitchell said in his radio call that he thought there was only one other person in the car, but as we'll find out later, there might have been more. Over the next 7 minutes, this seemingly normal traffic stop turned deadly. The first sign of trouble came when the police dispatcher didn't hear from Deputy Mitchell when they tried following up with him just a couple minutes later. Then at 3:34 a.m., Deputy Mitchell's radio was keyed, like someone was holding down the talk button but wasn't saying anything. Seconds later, it happened again. Now, this can happen for a lot of reasons. He could have just accidentally held down the talk button on his radio. But when it happened a second time, it seemed less likely to be just an accident. So this particular dispatcher thought it was worth following up on, just to make sure that everything was okay. So he radioed Deputy Mitchell directly to get his attention, but he didn't get a response. Next, he tried calling his personal cell phone. Nothing there either. 12 seconds later, the dispatcher radioed a code 3 call to all deputies on duty. Head to Mitchell's location right away with lights and sirens. There are some conflicting reports about the exact time that backup officers arrived, but the consensus seems to be that they got there at 3:37 a.m., 10 minutes after Deputy Mitchell's initial report of the stop, and 3 minutes after the code 3 was issued. When the first officer got there, he saw his fellow officer and friend lying on the side of the road next to the bumper of his patrol car. Ballistic testing would later confirm that he had been shot once in the head with his own service weapon. Additional officers started arriving on the scene and began performing CPR. Paramedics arrived at 3:59 a.m., and Deputy Mitchell was airlifted to the UC Davis Medical Center. But despite the fast response of the first responding officers and the hospital staff, he was pronounced dead at 4:45. He was just 38 years old, leaving behind a wife and a son. Within minutes of all this happening, this normally remote and quiet area of Sacramento County was now a crime scene with hundreds of law enforcement officers all wondering the same thing. Who shot him, and was it connected to the traffic stop? The first clue they had was Deputy Mitchell's radio call, the one about stopping the white van for not having visible license plates. It made sense that whoever was inside the van also saw what happened to him. But when the backup officers arrived, the van wasn't there anymore. And since this happened in the middle of nowhere in the dead of night, there weren't any eyewitnesses. So the first priority became finding this missing white Chevy. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Office wasn't alone in the search. They quickly got help from the FBI, the California Highway Patrol, and several neighboring police departments. If any agency saw it or a van that looked like it, they were asked to call it in so that it could be stopped and questioned. They knew the driver of the van had a head start. But if they could get police officers stationed everywhere throughout Sacramento, then they might have a chance at tracking it down. You can't just gun down a police officer and not expect every available law enforcement agency within a couple 100 miles to start looking for the shooter. And that's exactly what happened. Back at the scene where the shooting happened, there were two big clues. Mitchell's service weapon, which someone had gotten their hands on and shot him with, and number two, his handcuffs were on the ground like he had tried to use them. This is what then Sacramento County Sheriff's John McGinnis told reporters at the time, quote, "This may be a hunch and we may never know the answer, but it is my belief that there was something that heightened his response because it does look like he had begun to handcuff a suspect." End quote. There were also obvious signs that Deputy Mitchell was engaged in a very violent attack and fought for his life before being shot. So pretty early on, this is what the police theorized happened. The traffic stop started completely normal and calm, but at some point, Deputy Mitchell became concerned about something and initiated an arrest. He was either patting the person down or attempting to put handcuffs on them when he was attacked. And during all of that, the person was able to grab his service weapon and shoot him with it. After that, this person drove away in the white van. But like I said, Deputy Mitchell didn't go down without a fight. He was in great physical shape and was a pretty decent-sized guy. So he would have been able to put up a pretty good fight until the point the person grabbed his gun. Sacramento investigators also thought that maybe more than one person could be involved. No matter how physically strong he was, it was Deputy Mitchell versus a man with a gun, or deputy versus two guys with a gun. It wouldn't have been a fair fight. When it comes to the radio clicking, we don't know whether he did it on purpose to signal that he needed help, or that it was just an accident that happened during the struggle. Either way, and either one is a possibility. But it was a good thing it happened because that's what first signaled that something was wrong and alerted backup. On a roadside fence near the scene, the police noticed that part of it was damaged, like maybe someone had run their car into it. This led the police to wonder if the white van had any type of front end damage to it. But that was just a theory they had in the beginning. Eventually, the police discovered that the fence had been damaged well before all of this happened, so likely had nothing to do with the investigation. In a press conference held on Friday morning, Sacramento County Sheriff John McGinnis pleaded with the public for help in finding the missing van. And within the first few hours, they received a lot of tips from the public about possible sightings. But it wasn't until 12 hours later that they finally found it. And it only deepened the mystery of what really happened to Deputy Mitchell. The van was found floating half submerged in a river down below Highway 49 in El Dorado County. From where Deputy Mitchell was killed, that's about a 30-minute drive away or 28 miles. Now, if that doesn't sound strange, this definitely will. Inside were two bodies, one male and one female. The male was found slumped over the steering wheel, and the female was in the passenger seat. At first, investigators weren't 100% sure that this really was the van they were searching for, but they had a pretty good feeling that it was. The van had a front license plate, but it was bent upward, so it's possible that Deputy Mitchell just didn't see it. But oddly enough, when it was pulled from the water, investigators discovered that it still had the back license plate on it. So it actually had both plates. So maybe Deputy Mitchell just saw the bent front license plate and not the back one. Either way, under California law, drivers are supposed to have visible license plates on both the front and the back. So if Deputy Mitchell just didn't see the bent front plate, then he was still technically able and legally allowed to pull them over. But this also gave investigators some pause at first on whether this really was the van that he had just pulled over 12 hours earlier. The two people found dead inside were eventually identified as the van's registered owner, 43-year-old Alan Schubert, and his friend, 28-year-old Nicole Welch. Both of them were last seen alive at 9 p.m. on October 26th. Alan was from Sacramento, and his friend Nicole was from about 50 miles away in the North Highlands area. Autopsies revealed that they had both died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Initially, the sheriff said that the van could have gotten stuck in the river, causing a water backup in its tailpipe, but that was eventually ruled out. What was also strange was that the van wasn't fully submerged in the water. It was just pretty much to the tires that were underneath the water. So if either Alan or Nicole wanted to get out, they could. They could just simply open the doors and get out if they had somehow gotten stuck in the water. So, did someone else drive the car into the river, carrying Alan and Nicole's body? Well, this question leads to another theory. Alan and Nicole died from carbon monoxide poisoning before their car was dumped in the river. And if that's true, then yes, someone else would have had to have driven it there. It also means that both Nicole and Alan were likely already dead when Deputy Mitchell initiated the traffic stop on their van. Neither one of them had any physical injuries on their body, like they had been in a fight. So it seems unlikely that they were the ones who reached for the gun. And remember, Deputy Mitchell apparently said that there was only one person in the van when he was about to pull it over. So could someone else have killed Alan and Nicole, and while they were on their way to dump the bodies, Mitchell pulled him or her over for the bent front license plate? Let's now talk about who exactly Alan Schubert and Nicole Welch are. Well, here's everything I know about them. Alan Schubert had a criminal record that included charges for vandalism, DUI, and drug possession. And according to his family members, he hadn't driven with a valid license in over 10 years. Most of his arrest stemmed from his regular use of methamphetamines. At the time of his death, Alan was living in the van and sometimes working as a handyman. According to family and friends, he was taking his friend Nicole Welch up to Jackson to visit some friends. He probably didn't plan to be gone very long because he had an upcoming court appearance in downtown Sacramento that his family says that he would never miss. When the cops questioned Alan's girlfriend if she thought that maybe he could have killed himself, her answer was no. She didn't think that he would because they had plans to move in together and he wasn't depressed. Plus, he had his friend Nicole with him. So if he ever planned on taking his own life, then why would he also kill her? Now, when it comes to 28-year-old Nicole Welch, I wasn't able to find much about her except that she was friends with Alan Schubert. Other than that, I really don't have any information on her. So now the big question becomes, was this the same van that Deputy Mitchell pulled over? And if so, did Alan or Nicole have anything to do with his murder? Over the next several days, the police processed the van for forensic evidence, interviewed the families of Alan and Nicole, poured over thousands of tips, and investigated every lead that came in. but they had trouble getting any answers to those questions. Yes, it seems likely that it was the same white van, but there's no way to be 100% sure. The only fingerprints and DNA they found inside of the van belonged to either Nicole or Alan, and none of it implicated them in the murder. So by all accounts, they're both considered victims too. The Sacramento police don't consider them as suspects in Deputy Mitchell's murder, and still to this day, their cases remain unsolved too. So none of this made any sense. The circumstances of that morning, the time of day, the lack of substantial forensic evidence at the scene, no eyewitnesses, nothing. All of this made it a very, very difficult case for investigators to process. Where do you even begin in a case like this? Well, the police honed in on the town of Wilton, the nearest community to the shooting. According to the website SF Gate, at the time, Wilton only had about 4,500 residents, and just about every one of them became a suspect. People started looking at each other wondering, could you be the person responsible? No one could really trust one another, thinking that there was a cop killer somewhere out there on the loose. But no arrests were ever made. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago that there was a lack of substantial forensic evidence at the crime scene. Well, the police did have something, a small amount of unknown DNA. Here is what Sacramento County Sheriff John McGinnis said in a news report for TSPN, quote, "The DNA was found at a very critical, specific location at the scene, and we've determined that the donor is a person other than Officer Mitchell," end quote. So based on that statement, we really don't know where the DNA was found. It could have been on his service weapon or maybe his radio, but we don't know that for sure. The police are keeping that particular detail a secret for one reason or another. So we've got DNA. Now what? Well, there's a problem with it, and it's probably the reason why this case still hasn't been solved. The police only have a partial DNA profile, which is insufficient to identify a match in the National DNA Database. The sample is just too small to get any hits. All we know for sure is that it doesn't belong to Deputy Mitchell, so we can only assume that it belongs to the killer. On top of the partial DNA profile, they also found fingerprints at the scene that didn't belong to Mitchell either. But just like the DNA, they haven't found any matches yet. Detectives went door to door in Wilton, speaking with people and asking for a DNA sample to compare to what they found at the crime scene. They even reportedly went to the same guy's house at least 4 separate times to speak with him. But none of that yielded anything significant. We don't know why they went to that guy's house so many times, and no one from Wilton was ever arrested. At one point, the sheriff's office announced that 4 people in custody on unrelated charges were considered persons of interest in the case. However, ultimately, no arrests were made there either. So within just a matter of a few weeks, the case was in danger of turning cold. Jeffrey Mitchell's memorial service was held on Thursday, November 3rd at Sutter Health Baseball Park in Sacramento, a field that is now home to the Sacramento Rivercats minor league baseball team. More than 4,000 people attended the public service, including thousands of law enforcement officers from across the state. His public funeral was the only time they stopped actively working on the case. But as soon as the service wrapped up, they went right back to work, putting up more than 20 billboards across the state about the case. And a $225,000 reward was being offered for any new information. But by the end of the year, the case was at a standstill. More than 14,000 man-hours had been used, and the sheriff's office was rumored to have spent more than $1 million on it, more than half of that amount going to the department's overtime. Several years later, in 2013, the sheriff's office announced that it was retesting the DNA since testing had come a long way by then. But unfortunately, a full DNA profile still hasn't been created. Later that same year, the authorities announced that they were confident that the white van found in the river was definitely connected to the case. For a while, there had been some doubt about whether it really was. But that doesn't really mean that they thought either Alan or Nicole had anything to do with his murder. In fact, the authorities pretty much think that they're probably victims too. This now brings us to some of the theories surrounding this case. The first one is one that we've already touched on. Alan and Nicole were already dead inside the van when Deputy Mitchell pulled them over, and someone else was driving the van on the way to dump the bodies. But who would have had motive to shoot and kill a police officer during a simple traffic stop? Well, there's your answer. If you're on your way to dispose of two bodies that you have in a van that you're driving and you get pulled over, then that might give you motive. That could explain why Deputy Mitchell said that there was only one person in the car. He probably only saw the driver. But when he approached the van, that's when he might have seen one or both of the bodies. Then after that, Deputy Mitchell tried handcuffing the driver, but things escalated and the guy was able to get his service weapon and shoot him. This also explains why the van was dumped where it was. If either Nicole or Alan wanted to get out, they could have, because it was only really half of the tires that were submerged. They could have easily just opened the door and got out. That's if they were alive. But that theory doesn't explain everything, like how or why they died. Where did the carbon monoxide come from? And is the same person who killed Deputy Mitchell also responsible for murdering them? If so, why? What's his or her connection to Nicole and Alan? And what would be his motivation for killing them in such a strange way? How did he do it? Plus, is it really possible that at the same exact time you're dumping two dead bodies, you get pulled over by the cops? I guess it's possible, but the timing of that just seems so unlucky at the very least. So that's one theory. What about the others? Well, the second theory is that this white van actually had nothing to do with Deputy Mitchell's murder at all, and the deaths of Alan and Nicole are completely unrelated to this. So in other words, Deputy Mitchell pulled over a different van that night. Well, this theory seems to be the one that the police believe in the least. That's because in 2013, they pretty much said that they're confident the van is the one that Deputy Mitchell pulled over that night. And if that's the case, it certainly did have something to do with it. There isn't some other white van just running around somewhere. But what if Nicole and Alan weren't already dead when Officer Mitchell pulled them over? What if they were still alive? Or what if they were the only two people inside and something else happened to them afterward? After shooting Deputy Mitchell, they poisoned themselves with the carbon monoxide. That's another theory I guess you could say is out there. Now, there's a couple things I want to say about that. Neither Nicole nor Alan had a history of violent crimes, suggesting that they would be capable of something like that. Most, if not all, of Alan's arrests were related to drugs or alcohol. He was never thought as a violent person or anything like that. Alan's mom, Carolyn Rogers, said that since he'd been pulled over by the cops so many times in the past, he would have been pretty much used to it. And that meant that he wouldn't have put up any type of fight. He would have just suffered the consequences and taken the whole thing with a grain of salt. He certainly wouldn't have gotten into a fight with Deputy Mitchell, stolen his service weapon, and then shot and killed him. That's just not the kind of person that he was, according to his mom. Plus, like I mentioned earlier, neither one of them had any injuries to their bodies, suggesting that they had been in a fight. The only thing, from the autopsy at least, was the carbon monoxide, which is just bizarre in and of itself. What motive would Alan or Nicole have to do this themselves? Well, if you might remember, according to Alan's family, he hadn't had a valid driver's license in about 10 years. So maybe after Deputy Mitchell pulled him over, Alan was about to be arrested for not having a valid driver's license. Could that be the motive? He just didn't want to go to jail again? Then finally, the last theory is that something happened to Deputy Mitchell after his interaction with the white van. But does that even make sense? Deputy Mitchell's police radio started clicking within minutes of initiating the stop. It doesn't seem like there would have been enough time to finish with a traffic stop, have the van drive away, and then something else happened to him. I guess it's possible that another car pulled up while Deputy Mitchell was talking to the people inside of the white van, and they're the ones that are responsible for shooting him. But we don't have any evidence of that. The only car we know for sure that he interacted with that night was that van. So anything else would just be pure speculation. Officer Jeffrey Mitchell's memory is everywhere, not just in Sacramento, but across the country. The first place is on Memorial Plaque number 20 on the California Peace Officers Memorial Foundation's bronze monument in downtown, right across the street from the west steps of the Capitol building. There are also memorials of him at the Sacramento Police and Sheriff Memorial, the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C., the Sacramento Sheriff's Office Memorial Rose Garden, and a memorial wall in the administrative area of the Rio Correctional Center. At the location of Officer Mitchell's murder, there is a permanent memorial dedicated to him, including a memorial roadway dedication sign. Although there's no exact address for the sign, you can reach it by using simply the address range of 14058 through 14020 Mace Road in the community of Sloghouse. The Deputy Jeff Mitchell Baseball Field, or JMF, was built on August 29, 2009, and is a dedicated Little League baseball field. This was a truly special project in his memory because of how much he loved coaching and playing baseball. When Officer Mitchell was gunned down, he left behind a wife and a young son. He had spent the last 9 years of his life with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, and he was only 38 years old, with his entire life still ahead of him with his family. Everyone who knew him, including the police, is still dedicated to finding his killer. As long as this murder is unsolved, I will fight for him, Crystal Mitchell told CBS 13 reporters in an interview in 2011, and that promise still rings true today. As I sit here to record this episode today, it's now been almost 18 years since he was murdered. The police have in their possession both fingerprints and a partial DNA profile of who they believe is the gunman. They also have at least 2 persons of interest that they haven't been able to rule out yet. But we don't know who they are because their names haven't been made public. We also don't know why they haven't been arrested yet and are only considered, quote, persons of interest. I guess there's just not enough evidence against them yet. So what are the chances of this case still being solved? And how can forensic science finally catch a cop killer? I think our biggest chance is that if we can finally create a complete DNA profile. Once we have a full profile, we can either look for exact matches in the National DNA Database, or we can look for family members. Maybe a relative of the killer has already submitted their DNA to one of these public databases, like GEDmatch or 23andMe. Not everyone knows this, that once you submit your DNA to one of those websites to basically find out more about where you come from or more about your heritage, you essentially agree to have your DNA be searchable by law enforcement. So if you share DNA with someone who's committed a crime, then you might be the reason that that person, that family member, gets arrested. That's how so many suspects from old cold cases are being caught nowadays. Their relatives are submitting their DNA to these public searchable databases, and that's how their DNA is being connected to crime scenes. So I think the same thing can happen in this case once we have a full profile. Being able to identify just one distant relative of the suspect would be huge. If we could do that, it would at least get the ball rolling on something new, open up new doors that maybe have previously been closed shut or even locked. It could also help eliminate a lot of people as possible suspects so that law enforcement can really focus their attention on the right people. I've mentioned a few times that the police have at least two possible persons of interest that they basically haven't been able to eliminate over the years. Well, if we could finally get a complete and full DNA profile, then those two people could either be ruled in or they could be ruled out. If either one of them is the gunman, we can move forward and arrest him. But if neither matches, then it's simply time to move on from them, and we can finally put any suspicions about them, about these two people, to bed. Assuming the DNA hasn't become too degraded or too contaminated over the years, I think the case could benefit from a private lab specializing in genetic genealogy or advanced DNA testing to take a look at it. We've covered so many cases on the show where these private labs like Parabon Nanolabs or Othram out there in Texas have tested DNA samples that most state or county-run crime labs simply can't. A lot of publicly funded crime labs just don't have the same type of resources or the equipment that these private labs do. And that's why companies like Othram or Parabon Nanolabs are able to test really, really small amounts of DNA. Just the other week on the show, we covered a case where the amount of DNA the police had was the equivalent to a, quote, gnat's eyebrow or gnat's eyelash. And one of these private labs was able to generate a full profile that eventually led to an identification. So no matter how small or partial the sample is, I think it's worth reaching out to one of these genetic genealogy labs to see if there's anything they can do with it. Or at least help law enforcement build a complete profile from it and go from there. It's also worth sending all the evidence in the case to a private lab for advanced testing, not just the already discovered DNA. It's possible that other pieces of evidence contain the killer's DNA, and we just don't know about it yet. I'm thinking Deputy Mitchell's patrol car, his handcuffs, his uniform, anything and everything that might still be stored in evidence somewhere. The same can be said about any evidence from the white van where Alan and Nicole's bodies were found. I know the police swept it for evidence when it was first discovered, but it's worth going back and looking again. We already know that the police have said that they don't think Nicole or Alan had anything to do with it, and they're probably victims as well. Well, good, detailed DNA testing could officially give us answers to all of that. Plus, if someone else drove the van with their bodies inside of it, then maybe their DNA or fingerprints could still be recovered from the steering wheel or somewhere else inside the van. But that's all assuming the police still have it in their possession, which I don't know if they do or not. The Sacramento police said that they were retesting all the forensic evidence in 2013, but that was 10 years ago, and DNA testing has gotten even better since then. So if law enforcement could get some help from any private lab, then I think there's still a really good chance that they can get a full DNA profile created of the shooter. And we can also figure out what happened to Nicole and Alan, because I think whoever killed Deputy Mitchell also knows what happened to them. The most recent update by the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department on the case was on their Facebook page on October 27th, 2021. In the post, they outlined the basic details of the case and says, quote, "To this day, we still don't know what happened on that fateful night. The killer of Deputy Mitchell remains at large. Sheriff's Department detectives are still diligently working this heinous crime that continues to haunt this community. Local media continue to remind the public that this murder took the life of this dedicated officer, husband, father, and son. We will not give up on this investigation until we have the person responsible for the fatal wound that took the life of Deputy Jeffrey Mitchell arrested and sentenced for his murder. Anyone with information regarding the white van or homicide of Deputy Jeff Mitchell, please contact the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department." End quote. The phone number for the SSD tip line is 916-874-5070. What do you think happened to Deputy Mitchell in 2006 on that lonely stretch of highway in Sacramento? Do you think the two people inside the white van were already dead when he initiated that traffic stop? Or have you come up with your own theories about what might have happened? And do you think the DNA in this case will finally be what solves it? To share your thoughts on this week's episode, follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. To find out what I think about the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/Forensic Tales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode sharing my personal thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, consider leaving us a positive review. You can also help support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Please join me next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell Areola. For a small monthly contribution, you can help create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing costs. For supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. To learn more, please visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Christine B., Sherry A., Michael D., Nicola, Jerry M., Brian W., Megan G., Ureli, Jerry, Ann F., Ken S., Carol A., Luis B., and Marianne C. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or send me an email at courtney@forensictales.com. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.